be very focused on this presentation, and given the limited time, I'm actually quite glad that I decided to do that. And it basically follows what I presented Monday, and it tries to address some of the main challenges that we have in order to translate science into action. And so I would start saying that we really need to ask the right questions at the right time. And so that's the main challenge that we have. So what are the research questions that have the influence, they have the power to change the way we make decisions? It seems quite straightforward, but that's not often the case. So at Conservation International, all of our research is very much focused into addressing issues that we have a limited knowledge and that will have an impact working with the partners that we have around the world. Things like what we are doing now in terms of finding out what are specific actions for ecosystems-based adaptation, for example, or where to target interventions that will address restoration efforts in a more cost-effective way. So these are just an example of two interventions that I think are focused. They try to address some of the questions that we know are very much needed by the governments of the countries where we work. So developing appropriated metrics, decision supporting tool and monitoring tools. This is very much a challenge that we are facing now. Many of the services that we talk about, they're hardly proxies to measure them. It's very, very, very hard, and there's very limited experience in monitoring that in the field on a regular, timely basis. And so I think this is something where we really need to pay attention and push the envelope in terms of doing research. We are very much used to doing research on biodiversity, climate, in terms of carbon, water flows, water yields, water sediments. But for many of the other ecosystem services, it's extremely hard, especially for those whose information is not available, on remote sensing information. So we really need to develop strategies to address this issue. And it's quite obvious, but I'll repeat myself here. We really need to study those areas that are less studied. There's there is an immense focus on terrestrial areas and little to no or limited effort on coastal and marine ecosystem sources, for example. And so this is also an area which we need to further develop research. A very sticky point is the question of equity and distribution, and I would add the gender here as well. I think there's very limited work by this community addressing those issues. We oftentimes do biophysical assessments, we do valuation work, but we stop right there. We really don't address who gains, who losses, how are those gains and losses distributed amongst different communities. So this is also an area in which we are trying to put some attention and looking into some specific areas with respect to risk management and climate change. Almost last, how do we scale the values from local studies? This is something I mentioned before. There are very good studies out there. They're very localized. They address specific questions. But when we try to scale up, that's where the difficult begins. Value transfer has its limits. We have no alternative in many ways, but it has to be done with extreme care. And I think there is still a lot to be learned about how we can scale those values to other higher levels, say from local to regional to national. And that is very important when we want to account for services for the perspective of national accounting systems. As I mentioned before, this is very much an issue that I think attention is needed and work is needed. If we want to follow the TEEB recommendation that we need to demonstrate, recognize, demonstrate, and capture the values, I think that's also an area in which we need to put a lot of attention. I will stop here. I think we'll have a plenary where we can discuss those issues more, and I hope this shed a little bit of light into what we need to do.